as Elaine said, my name's Xavier. I work at Square. Steve Conover was supposed to be here presenting with me, but he's quite ill, so he had to bow out. It's okay, I've included some Steve quotes in the presentation. It'll be like he's just here. So this presentation, I guess, it's more of just, it's an experience report. We've used JRuby at Square. We've been using it for quite a number of months now. And this is sort of things that we've found, things that have helped us, and hopefully things that will help you. How many people here are running JRuby in production? A couple of people? Okay, so it'll be interesting to see maybe afterwards to compare things that you've seen that are the same, things that you've seen that are different. There's been ups and downs and whatever. So to start with some context, this used to be a fairly accurate architecture diagram of Square, which was great when we first started. It allows you to move very quickly, it has a lot of benefits, but it also has a lot of downsides. So we started to move towards more of this architecture with lots of different services, and now this also has downsides, but it has the upsides that we want. So we can split out our SLAs, we can split code bases between developers. Just worked a lot better for us. Of course, we then had to figure out how do you do this, because you have to be able to deploy more than one thing, and you have different servers. It all gets very complicated, especially when we have Rails apps. We've got some Java web services, some Sinatra stuff, some Ruby stuff, which isn't even a web, like it's just running background processes. So we needed to figure out how to do this easily, because we need the cost of starting one of these up to trend towards zero, right? When you only have one app, it doesn't really matter what the startup cost is as far as deploying it, because you've done it once and you don't have to worry about it. But when you have all of these services with new ones springing up all the time, you need to really think about how are you going to deploy these and what's your infrastructure going to look like. And so we decided for our Ruby stuff to go towards JRuby, and I'll be talking a bit more about that decision and how we came to it later on. I've got four main things that I want to talk about. The first is Java integration, which is something that you get on JRuby, which you don't get on any other interpreter. I don't have a lot to say about that, so that's why I put it first to get out of the way. I want to talk about deployment. That's a big one. I wanted to talk about some Rails-specific stuff that we found running Rails on JRuby. And then I wanted to talk about development and as far as developer environments rather than deployment. So to start with Java integration, this seemed like a really cool win with JRuby. There's a lot of stuff in the Java world, and we'd be able to use it if we're on JRuby. And we've got Java teams at Square as well. So presumably we could share stuff with them and things would be great. Wasn't really as immediately useful as we thought it would be. This wasn't because we tried stuff and it didn't work, it didn't come up and we didn't really end up doing it much. We still do have some grand plans for code reuse across our Java teams and our Ruby teams, but so far we haven't had anything worth reusing across those teams, so it hasn't come up. One thing we did do was we integrated with Neo4j, which is a graph database written in Java, and it has a there's actually a gem called Neo4j, the gem, or Ruby Neo4j, which wraps all of the Java classes in nice Ruby isms and everything to let you, call the Neo4j API. And so we did use this. We used it to bulk load the graph database. We actually ended up not using the Neo4j gem, but rather just using the Java classes directly because it worked out easier for what we wanted to do with some indexing stuff. And I thought this was really, really cool. This was the promise of, hey, we can use Java in Ruby code, and it was really, really easy. It's like you don't even have to think twice about it. You just do it, and before you know it, you've already done it, and it's working. And you're like, wow, that was really unexpected. In the end, we're not using this. Like we use this to sort of bootstrap our stuff to get started, but we're not using it in production now because with Neo4j, we were running the embedded server to get it up to started, but now we're running the REST server and we just have a REST client that talks to it, so there's no need for direct bindings. But it was cool that we were able to do that, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. This is another thing that's been really handy. We've got some really old school Java guys at Square who have some really strong opinions about the JVM and know how to tune it, know how Java works, and know how the garbage collector works, and know which options you need to pass into your interpreter, blah, 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 blah. That's been really, really useful because it means we've been able to apply the same sets of things to our deployments as opposed to having to have a separate set of Ruby and Java chops for deployment. So that's also been a really big thing for us. Might not be a big thing for most shops because a lot of companies don't have that mix of Java and Ruby developers. But in our case, this was sort of an extra thing that sweetened the deal for JRuby for us. So as I said, that was a bit of a short section. I just wanted to throw it out there. So deployment. This is kind of the big thing for us. How we tend to approach things at Square is we'll be going along, we'll be doing things, and then we'll sort of notice, hey, this team over there is deploying a new service, and this team over here is deploying a new service, and they use JRuby because they want to use Java, and now we've got 4 different deployment environments. Let's figure out how we can not do that and see what wins we can get from integrating across the organization. And this is a quote from Matthew O'Connor, our Director of Engineering. We sort of do a big meeting, get everybody in, and sort of everybody discusses what they want, and then we sort of nominate a panel of 3 people. And then Matthew said, and Steve and I were 2 of those 3. And Matthew said to us, this is your guiding question, go figure it out and don't bother me again. So this was guiding our decision to go to the JVM. We deploy our Java stuff on Jetty. If we could also deploy our Ruby stuff on Jetty as well, that makes things a lot easier for us when we have lots of these services. This question was asked, I can't remember exactly how many months ago it was, maybe 3 months ago, and already it's starting to pay dividends being on that same platform. But so the question is, how do you actually deploy a web application, a Ruby web application on JRuby? And there's actually a number of options here. At one end of the spectrum, you can package up everything you have as a WAR file and ship it off to a Java application server. And this can work, but for us, we didn't have a Java application server to ship this thing to. So it was an extra thing that we would have to do and manage in order to get started. So we sort of shied away from this approach. The other thing is, because you're packaging everything up inside a WAR file, it's not very Ruby-ish in that Ruby tends to expect files on the file system. There are kind of ways around that, but in general, that was kind of a little bit difficult. So there's some other options. There's Trinidad, which, as far as I know, Engine Yard uses. Yep. And so clearly that's got something going for it. It does use Tomcat, though. We were already using Jetty for our Java projects. We have a lot of Jetty fans, especially from the Java side of the office. So we were kind of hoping to be able to stick with Jetty to have that integrated server across all of our apps. So we passed on Trinidad. Kirk is from the Strobe guys. I don't know, is anybody from Strobe here? No? This is the one we initially used to deploy our very first JRuby app we deployed with Kirk. These are all quotes from the READMEs of the projects, by the way. Also a quote from their README. And we found that wasn't quite right. We had all sorts of problems with it. This may have changed, although I don't think there's been any commits since we used it, so it probably hasn't. But, pardon? It's completely abandoned. It's completely abandoned, yeah. Yeah, there were just things once, it looks great on your development environment, but then when you try to deploy it and get your logs going to the right place and get your PID files monitored by Monit and all these things that you have to do when you're in production, it just didn't work for us. Mizuno was a sort of a simpler version, which was also there, which looked promising, but did tend to have the same sort of issues that we'd seen with Kirk. None of these options really fit very well for us. So after sort of playing around with this, and we had some sort of batch scripts to kind of get Jetty working with Ruby, just playing around, we thought, actually, hey, this is pretty cool. We can use Jetty as Jetty, so not try and embed it in Ruby, not try any of that stuff, just have a Jetty server, And then we can have Ruby code, and it doesn't have to be packaged, it can be out on the file system. So we can let Ruby be Ruby, we can let Jetty be Jetty, and we can just marry the two together. And that's the approach we took for Jetpack, which is a tool that we wrote. Now, it's kind of similar to the alternatives in that most of these things are based on JRuby rack, and it sort of has the same idea of let's take this Java application server or web server and put it with our Ruby code. I was talking to Steve about this earlier today, and this was his commentary on that. This was really the only one that we got to work for us. And as of today, as of right now, we've just open sourced this, if you're interested. So what we found really good about this is it's essentially a glorified batch script that packages everything up, ships it over into a tarball, ships it over to your server, and unpacks it on your server. You don't need a Ruby runtime on your server. You just need a Java install. You don't need a Java application server. You just need Java. And from that, you can just run everything. This also provides wrapper scripts to be able to run rake and IRB and all that sort of thing. So that's it's a fairly simple project, but it works for us really, really well. So maybe it will work for you. I can't believe the name Jetpack was available. We initially called it Preflight, but then that was taken when we went to deploy it, and so we scrambled today to come up with a new name. And Jetty, packaging, Jetpack, we were stoked. Anyway, so with this, what we tend to do is, so we'll deploy to a server, and we'll probably deploy to 2 servers or 3 servers, depending on what the SLA of the app is. And then we can just do a rolling deploy to those servers with HA proxy. We just use a thin set of scripts on top of Capistrano to do this. They're really not very interesting. They just do as I said, do the tarball up, simulate concurrent, hit HA proxy to say, hey, take this person out of the rotation. That works really well. So yeah, we're not even going to bother to open source that because it's literally just basic Capistrano. But that's sort of how we ship our code out to our servers. Having just one process with real threads is much, much nicer than having 10 processes running on a machine. We've just found it much easier to manage. As part of this, so actually, sorry, I forgot a bit. So with Jetpack, this also gives you a script, which it's an initd script to start and stop your service, which is what our Java guys were doing, so it actually fits with our Java guys. So our apps are really easily monitored by Monet, because you get an initd script, you put Monet on it, and you kind of can do that with having multiple processes, but it's far easier if you have one process, one PID, it's either alive or it's dead. That's been really useful for just simplifying a lot of things. So as far as Rails goes, so following on from the threads thing, this also means that we can have background processes really, really simply. We've been using Girl Friday, and it's been great. It's a library by Mike Perham. And it means that we don't have to have a separate set of workers running our background jobs. We can just have this one process with one PID that can also do background processing as well as servicing web requests. It just drastically lowers the barrier to entry to doing a service properly. So we've found that that's been a really useful library, and that model of not having separate background workers has worked really well for us. Biggest problem with Rails we've found is that thread-safe mode isn't really very widely used, which means it's not really widely tested. So we've stumbled across a couple of bugs with this. Hopefully you'll stumble across fewer, because we found them first. This hasn't, so for instance, we found a bug with AREL where we were querying one record and we were getting another user's details back, which was very, very weird. But we were able to patch this and it got accepted into Rails very quickly. So the Rails guys, to their credit, have been very, very helpful and supportive of us with thread-safe issues and trying to debug them and that sort of thing, and accepting patches and that kind of stuff. There's still a few auto-loading issues around. This is still an open issue, which I've spent far too long trying to figure out. But we haven't really been bitten by it. Well, the thing is, because it's related to auto-loading, you might get an exception when the app starts up and then never again. So it's not really that big a deal. Especially, and you can, I mean, for this was an internal app, but if that was a really big problem, as you start your app up, you can just spray it with requests. But yeah, so this is an auto-load issue, but in general, apart from that, it hasn't been that big a deal, and it hasn't made this experience particularly painful. I mean, it sucked a little bit. It's pretty obvious when you get a concurrency bug. Like if you get something like this happening when your app starts up in the require code, require in Ruby is known to be not thread safe. It's kind of obvious that it's like, oh, that's a threading bug. So yeah, so that hasn't really been a huge deal for us. It's been a little bit painful, but it's much better now. So those are just a couple of Rails-specific things that we've seen. So development. So this is all great. We're deploying. We've got apps. We're running. We've got one process. We love it. This is a really big deal. JRuby takes freaking ages to start up. It really sucks. And part of that is unavoidable. I mean, the JVM takes a while to start up. There are things you can do like Nailgun, where you sort of have a process running and it effectively forks off processes to try and work around this problem. We didn't find anything that was really, really solid in doing that. And we really like our startup times quick. If you want to get a really good TDD cycle going, 1.5 seconds just for JRuby is too long. So we decided to run both. So we actually develop on 193 and we deploy on JRuby. Now the most important thing about this is that you run your CI using both Rubies. So apologies for putting a block of code on a slide. You can look at this afterwards. But the general idea is this is just a bash script that we have on projects, which knows how to use RVM to install the Rubies that it needs, to switch them around and to run the tests using the different Rubies. If you've got this, you can't go too far wrong. We haven't been bitten by any errors in production by developing 193 because our CI is able to catch any problems. So this is kind of the foundation. If you're going to do this, you need this. Practically, what does this mean? Well, for pretty much every app, you're going to have to use different database drivers. If you're using Active Record or SQL or Datamap or something, that will abstract this, the majority of this problem away from you. The only time you'll then have to do more than this is, well, obviously your configuration, you'll have to have a if JRuby load this driver, otherwise load this driver. Or if you're accessing the drivers directly, like if you're executing raw SQL or something. For instance, these two gems, this is some code we have. Result is the raw result back from the database driver. They're slightly different in each case. As I said, the ORMs deal with this for you, but if you're hitting them yourself, then you're going to have to do it yourself. And then we also found process management to be slightly different between the two. There is a gem that does this for you called popen4, which one of our apps is using it, and the app that I'm writing, we just use that because it was simpler than pulling in another gem, and it wasn't that hard. So that's it. Like the cost of writing cross-Ruby compatibility, of writing cross-Ruby code is really, really low. I grepped all of our code bases for like an if Ruby platform equals Java, and those three examples are the only things I could find. So it's really not that hard, and I think is really worthwhile. The benefit of this also is you kind of hedge your bets a little bit. The way we see all these things, like deciding to run JRuby production, it's a bet. It's an architectural bet. We're saying, we think that doing this will pay off in the future. And as with most bets, if you can hedge them, that's a good win. So we looked at both things. So if we go down the JRuby path, and in 2 years it sucks, or in X amount of time it sucks, what's the cost going to be to switch back to MRI? Versus, if we're on MRI and we go down for a few years and it sucks, what's the cost of switching to JRuby? It's kind of a finger in the air type guess, but it seemed, since most people are using MRI, like switching back to MRI would be fairly easy. Especially since we were running it in development. Going from, if MRI turned out to be a really bad move architecturally, switching from that to JRuby seemed like it would be a much bigger deal because of these driver options, but also having to get the infrastructure in place to be able to run JRuby code. So this kind of being able to hedge our bet on that is, especially since we kind of get it for free, is really nice. So we're developing on 1.9. We do have apps in both in JRuby, running both 1.8 mode and 1.9 mode. When we put out our first JRuby app, 1.9 mode in JRuby wasn't quite there yet. Nowadays, it really is. It's pretty solid. And the JRuby guys have come out and said that the only, I spoke to Charles a month or two back, and I think his exact words were, "It's all fine except for the encoding stuff," pretty much. So yeah, we've been running both of these in production, and yeah, they work great. So I mean, I'd go with 1.9 because I like the hash syntax and the stabby syntax, but whatever you like. So those are the 4 things I've covered: Java, deployment, Rails, development. As I said, we're not doing anything sort of revolutionary or bleeding edge with this stuff, but we're doing it. And so my hope with this was sort of just to get that data point out there. Here's an experience of a company that's using JRuby. It's been hasn't been totally knocked out of the park. It hasn't been terrible. It's been better than average though. So hopefully that's helpful to some people. This is when we had to recommend, when we were trying to figure out how to recommend this to other people. This was how Steve phrased it. And he, as well as hedging bets, likes to hedge his sentences, but so far we haven't had a good reason not to. So it's been great for us. There's me on Twitter if you want to ask me questions afterwards, or maybe you want to ask me questions now. Up the back there. Since we're dealing with payments, and that's really important, not quite people dying, but still important, what are we running our backend on? Are we running our backend on JRuby? Let me think. Most of our payments code is actually Java. There's some stuff in our main Rails app, which is actually, so one thing I should have said, we do have that big Rails app that I showed you at the start is now much, much smaller than it used to be, but it's still running on REE. We haven't migrated that across, so we're just starting up, as we start up new services and take things out of it, we're starting them up in JRuby. I'm not sure if we have any JRuby directly in the payment flow yet, but we would. I think we're. You
feel comfortable?
Yeah, we're comfortable enough that. No, actually, sorry, I lied. We do have some JRuby in the sort of critical path, and yeah, it's been serving us really well. So yeah, we're comfortable enough with it that we would. So are we transferring the API endpoints from MRI to JRuby? Most of them are moving to Java, actually, as in, because our main payment API endpoints, we've got a Java app for those.
So what was the JRuby plans for?
JRuby, so we use it for a lot of different things. Oh, so actually, yeah, I should give some specific examples of what we're doing. We've got an app that does kind of Google Analytics type stuff, like it's an analytics sort of thing, so it collects a lot of data from our public website. We've got an internal app that the risk team uses to do transaction review and to find fraud and that sort of thing. We've got some settlement and reconciliation related stuff running on JRuby. We've got some other ETL processes to do with our graph database, and we've got we've got 2 ETL things. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've missed any. And I think there's a few more coming along, so cool. So there were 2 questions there. The first one was, we have a lot of Java developers in-house. If we didn't, would we still recommend JRuby? So it's nice in that it can save us a bit of time, but really we would have done it anyway, I think. It's, it's nice to have guys who just know Java backwards, but we haven't really had to rely on them too much. It's a good safety net, but we haven't had to fall on it. The second question was, have we noticed any performance anomalies? The startup time is really the only one. It's really quite killer. And even in production, like starting up a new production instance, like takes a good 10 seconds plus. As far as we haven't noticed any other significant performance anomalies either way. Any other questions? Cool, well I'll be hanging around if anyone wants to come up and chat, but otherwise thank you very much.